what do you see? 0 pesos, right? So the story behind this is that when I was in high school, this was the amount I paid for my whole high school education. So that's 4 years. That's because I studied in Philippine Science High School. And I'm very lucky to be able to do so. And when I went to university in UP, University of the Philippines, to study engineering, this was actually my enrollment form for the last semester of college. So if you can see, I only paid 78 pesos and 50 centavos for my last semester in UP. And if I compute how much I paid in total for my whole college education, that's 5 years of engineering, I paid 950 pesos for 5 years of college. And that's because I was also lucky. I got granted the Oblation Scholarship, where you have to be one of the top 50 scorers of the UPCAT in University of the Philippines. And I'm very, very grateful for these opportunities. And I know that more than being grateful, I'm also extremely, extremely lucky. Because I know that most Filipinos don't have these opportunities. Most Filipinos aren't lucky enough to get to college. In fact, if you look at the statistics, only 1 out of 10 Filipinos who go into elementary school are able to finish university. And I know that while it wasn't a problem to me to pay tuition fees, many students, even maybe some in this room, get quite worried when it's time to pay their tuition fees during enrollment. And I know that, especially in the provinces, a lot of students will skip breakfast or go without shoes just to be able to pay for a pencil or a notebook that they need for school. It's that bad. And it's very disheartening to see that while I'm extremely lucky, most other students are not. So, as an Iskolar ng Bayan, I knew that I had to do something. Not enough for me to study hard, not enough for me to join clubs. I really had to extend myself. I really had to be of service and pay it forward. And so when I was in university, I led the KRIS Library, or Cristiano Islam Peace Library for short. So what does KRIS Library or Cristiano Islam Peace Library stand for? Well, what we did was we built libraries and we provided scholarships to young people affected by conflict and poverty in different areas in the Philippines, but particularly in Mindanao. If you can see from these pictures, we had 2 focuses. The first focus was education. We wanted to provide books and other educational materials to young people in far-flung areas who didn't have enough of these materials. But at the same time, we also wanted to promote peace. That's why we concentrated in several areas in Mindanao where there was conflict, where there was war, because we wanted the library to stand there as a symbol of peace. If you see, we have Muslim students and Catholic students coming into these libraries, celebrating peace, getting to know each other, reading together, learning together, studying together, and forming friendships that are really the bedrock of peace. So those are the 2 objectives of KRIS Library. And the reason why that religion part came to be was because of my parents. So my dad, the one on the left, he's Catholic. He was born in Zamboanga. Meanwhile, my mom, she's Muslim. She was born in Sulu. She's a Tausug. And even though they had that difference in religion, they still fell in love with each other. And they chose to live those 2 religions within their marriage. So they didn't convert each other. So when my family started out, we had 2 religions living inside one house. We had to respect both religions, and my siblings and I had to grow up with both of these religions. And living in that house where those 2 religions coexisted was such a stark contrast to to what was happening outside. Because outside, when you put the words Muslim and Christian together, usually it's about conflict, usually it's about war, usually it's about terrorism. Even with the talks these days about the Bangsamoro Organic Law, still there are terrorist acts happening. But we wanted to pry the young people away from that messaging. We wanted to be the alternate story. We wanted to tell them through this organization, through this narrative, that peace is possible. So I have a myriad of stories of KRIS Library because I worked there for 6 years. But I'm just going to tell you 3 ones today. So the first story I'm going to tell you is about Martin. So I mentioned earlier that KRIS Library has a scholarship program. In total, we were actually able to fund the scholarship grants of 400 students from elementary to university. And I'm very happy to say that we were able to graduate 7 college students. But that was a very, very difficult uphill climb because of money. So in 2015, we had 3 college scholars studying in one university who were on their last semester in college. So 3 of them. And they actually had a partial scholarship in their university. So we only had to pay for about half of their tuition fee. But 3 of them failed in one subject, sabay-sabay sila. And unfortunately, they lost their scholarship with the university. So as it ended, we then had to pay for the full amount of their tuition fees. But at that point, we couldn't. That amounted to thousands of pesos more, and we were just so tight already because we also had other scholars to think about. And imagine, we were a small non-profit organization. We don't have donors like Ayala Foundation or SM Foundation. We mostly coursed our funds through donations by private individuals. And so we were in a really, really, really tough spot. So that year, 2015, we had 2 choices. The first choice, either we let go of our scholars. We say, it's your fault, you failed the subject. We had an agreement, but you didn't fulfill. Sorry, we don't have the funds. You're on your own. The second choice was to help them until the end. And we chose the second because we figured out that these 3 worked really hard to get where they were then, which is the last semester, the very last semester of college. Then we would make sure that they finish until the very end. So that's what we did. So, okay, we committed. Okay, we'll help you finish. We'll get the few hundred thousands more that we need to fund your education. So we started looking for donations everywhere we could. But we still couldn't come up with the full amount. So where does Martin come into the picture? That year, in 2015, when I was already very, very desperate to raise a significant amount of money, I happened to take a break to go to Singapore to attend the youth conference. When I was in Singapore, I was actually very sad the whole time, even though I was able to meet with other Southeast Asian delegates, other Southeast Asian leaders. I was weighed down by the problem with KRIS Library back home. So much so that during one of the sessions, a small group session where we had a sharing, there was this one speaker who was standing in front like this, and then telling his story about how when he first started his own non-profit organization, he spent so much of his own money just to make it work. And he was quite emotional, and I started crying. I started crying ugly and loudly. And so he asked me what was wrong. So I couldn't help it. I told him my whole story. I have these scholars back in the Philippines. We couldn't give them the money that they need. We don't know if we could get them the money. What do I tell them? How do I tell them? Etc., etc., etc. And he gave me comforting words, and then he left it at that. At the end of the day, Martin approached me. He said, "How much more do you need? I'll ask a few friends, and I'll make sure to send it over." And that whole experience, in the end, by the way, the 3 scholars were able to graduate. that whole experience in the end taught me that if you keep trying, there will be kind souls out there who will always be ready to help. And miracles do happen. Okay. My second story is about Cha. So Cha is one of our scholars from Zamboanga. Cha started as a scholar in KRIS Library when she was in high school. And when she was in college, we also continued to support her through scholarship. But the problem with Cha was that while she was a scholar, she also had to support her family. So while she was studying education at that time because she always wanted to become a teacher. She was also working as a maid, as a household helper, as a yaya, stay in. So she told me that while she was studying, she would go to class at 7, and then she would leave school at about 4 p.m., 5 p.m. And then she would go home to the home of her amo, and she would clean and cook and take care of the kids until about midnight. And then she would sleep for 2 to 3 hours. And then she would wake up at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. to study, and then back at 7 a.m. at school. So this was 4 years of her life. But successfully, she was able to graduate, and now she's teaching science in a public school. And what's really, really inspiring about her is that even though she had that full schedule, and even though she was giving everything to finish her education, she still found time to go to our libraries to volunteer. So whenever there were kids there to help to read or to teach, she would be there, actually helping them. So teaching was really in her DNA. And now, since she's a public school teacher who's earning quite a lot, she's not only able to fulfill her dream of be a teacher, she's also helping others to dream as she did. And my last story is about myself. So, KRIS Library for us was not only about what we did in the organization, it was also about sharing a very specific story that peace is possible. So when I had my graduation photo taken, I had it taken twice because I wanted it to reflect the two identities that I grew up with. First, as a quote-unquote normal Christian, someone who grew up in Manila. And then second, a Muslim, part of my mom's identity, the family name, the blood that came from Sulu and Mindanao. So these two identities are what I would keep on sharing to tell people that even though they look different, they're exactly the same person. Even though Christians and Muslims believe in different faiths, they're all Filipinos. Even though they worship differently, even though they eat different stuff, they still want unity, they still want peace. And this is the message that we kept on sharing. At KRIS Library, first we started to share it with the people in our communities, our classmates, our friends, our families. And then when people started to listen, we shared it to a wider audience. And then eventually, people started to look for us so that we would share our story to them until later on, we were able to share our story with the world. So now, this story of KRIS Library, this story of Islam and Christianity has reached audiences beyond the Philippines, and we've been able to share this narrative against terrorism and against extremism in different countries in the world. And today, I'm very happy to tell you that I continue to hope that this story keeps on inspiring people whenever they see it. So with these 3 stories I shared, I think the string that puts them together is the lesson that no matter how little you give, the impact could be big. So for the first story, it's the hope that we will be able to raise the funds that we need. And then for the second story, it's the scholarship grant that for Cha has changed her life and is now changing the lives of the hundreds of the thousands of students that she will be teaching throughout her career. And for the third story, It's the simple message, it's a simple narrative that when you put a Muslim and a Christian together, the result isn't always war or conflict. So just these three things, three small things, three simple things have created a huge impact that hopefully continue to create ripples of change. And we were able to do this in KRIS Library, and I'm sure that you would be able to as well. I stand here today and I see a lot of people who presumably study in this school and are aspiring doctors, yes? Some of them may be educators, aspiring scientists, medical practitioners, researchers, and aspiring young people who want to make a difference someday. Please continue to believe in the power of small things. I started my journey of change just with this number, but that doesn't mean that it's zero. To me, it means that it's priceless. The government or the country said that here is the tax money, here is your education. Use it to pay forward what the country has given you. And that's what I've done, and that's what our scholars are doing, and that's what the people who our scholars' lives are touching are doing, and that's what the people who have come to our libraries are doing, and that's what the people who have heard this message are doing. Pay it forward. Thank you.